Imagine discovering a continent sitting on an unimaginable fortune. A continent filled with gold, diamonds, oil, natural gas, cobalt, copper, uranium, fertile farmland, vast rivers, and one of the youngest populations on Earth. A continent so rich that industries across the globe depend on its resources every single day. Now imagine that same continent being associated with poverty, underdevelopment, and economic struggle. It sounds like a contradiction, but that's exactly the reality of Africa. And it raises one of the most fascinating questions of our time. How can a continent with so much wealth still struggle to provide prosperity for hundreds of millions of people? The answer isn't simple. In fact, the deeper you look, the more complicated the story becomes. Because Africa's problem has never been a lack of resources. Its story begins long before modern borders existed. Long before skyscrapers. Long before globalization. Long before most African nations were even born. For thousands of years, Africa was home to powerful civilizations. The Kingdom of Mali became famous for its immense wealth. Its ruler, Mansa Musa, is often described as one of the richest people who ever lived. When he traveled across North Africa during a pilgrimage, he reportedly distributed so much gold that local economies were affected. Further east, powerful kingdoms controlled trade routes connecting Africa to Asia and the Middle East. In the north, great cities flourished. In the south, sophisticated societies built thriving communities. Africa was never an empty continent waiting to be discovered. It was already rich, already connected, already important. But everything began to change when European powers started looking at Africa through a different lens. Not as a collection of civilizations, but as a source of wealth. Gold, ivory, rubbers, land, labor. Resources. During the 19th century, European nations raced to divide Africa among themselves. Borders were drawn on maps by people sitting thousands of kilometers away. Entire ethnic groups were split apart. Communities that had little history together were suddenly forced into the same colonies. The goal wasn't development. The goal was extraction. Railways were built. Roads were built. Ports were built. But many of these projects were not designed to help local populations. They were designed to move resources from the interior of Africa to ships waiting on the coast. Wealth flowed outward, not inward. Year after year, decade after decade, millions of tons of valuable resources left the continent. Meanwhile, much of the population saw very little benefit. Then came independence. Across Africa, nations finally gained control over their own futures. There was hope, huge hope. Many believed prosperity would follow. After all, the continent still possessed enormous natural wealth. Oil fields, diamond mines, gold reserves, vast agricultural land. The ingredients for success seemed to be there. But independence brought new challenges. Many newly formed countries inherited borders that had been designed by colonial powers. Political tensions emerged. Some nations faced instability. Others experienced military coups. And while certain leaders genuinely wanted development, others saw an opportunity to enrich themselves. Corruption became a major obstacle. Money generated from natural resources often failed to reach ordinary citizens. Instead of funding schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and economic growth, large portions of that wealth disappeared into private accounts. Yet even that doesn't fully explain Africa's paradox. Because another problem was hiding beneath the surface. A problem economists call the resource curse. And strangely enough, the more resources a country discovers, the more vulnerable it can become. Countries blessed with oil, minerals, and valuable exports often become dependent on those resources. Governments focus on extraction instead of diversification. Industries struggle to grow. Innovation slows down. Economic shocks become more dangerous. And when global prices collapse, entire economies can suffer overnight. Ironically, the wealth that should create prosperity can sometimes trap nations in cycles of dependence. But this is only part of the story. Because despite everything you've heard so far, Africa is changing, and faster than many people realize. In fact, the next chapter may completely challenge the way the world sees the continent. For decades, much of the world has viewed Africa through a single lens: poverty, conflict, crisis. But that image tells only part of the story. Because while many people still see Africa as a continent struggling to catch up, something remarkable is happening beneath the surface. A transformation, one that could reshape the future of the entire world. Today, Africa is home to more than 1 billion people. And unlike many regions facing aging populations, Africa is incredibly young. Every year, millions of young people enter the workforce. Millions of entrepreneurs launch businesses. Millions of students gain access to technology that previous generations could only dream about. For the first time in history, a teenager in Nairobi, Lagos, Kigali, or Accra can connect instantly with the global economy. Ideas travel faster. Knowledge spreads faster. Opportunities appear faster. The digital revolution is changing the rules. Across the continent, mobile banking has exploded. In places where traditional banks struggled to reach communities, smartphones filled the gap. People can now transfer money, build businesses, and participate in financial systems directly from their phones. Entire industries are emerging. Technology startups are attracting international investment. Innovation hubs are growing. New infrastructure projects are connecting cities and regions. And while challenges remain, the pace of change is impossible to ignore. Countries like Botswana have demonstrated how resource wealth can be managed more effectively. Rwanda has become known for rapid development and ambitious modernization projects. Morocco continues investing heavily in infrastructure and renewable energy. Across East Africa, technology sectors are expanding. The story is no longer only about what went wrong. It's increasingly about what comes next. But Africa's greatest resource may not be found underground. Not gold, not diamonds, not oil, people, human potential. By the end of this century, Africa could represent one of the largest concentrations of young talent anywhere on Earth. That matters, because history shows that nations become wealthy not simply because of resources, but because of how effectively they use them. Japan became an economic powerhouse with relatively few natural resources. Singapore transformed itself despite limited land and resources. South Korea rose from poverty to prosperity within a few generations. The lesson is clear. Resources help, but institutions, education, innovation, stability, and leadership matter even more. Africa's future will not be decided solely by what lies beneath its soil. It will be decided by what its people build above it. And perhaps that is the most important thing to understand. The question was never really, why is Africa so rich yet so poor? The real question is, what happens when a continent this rich finally unlocks its full potential? Because despite every challenge, despite every setback, despite centuries of exploitation, conflict, and missed opportunities, the story of Africa is still being written. Its cities are growing. Its industries are expanding. Its population is rising. Its influence is increasing. And while nobody can predict exactly what the future holds, one thing is certain. The world cannot afford to ignore Africa. Not anymore. Because Africa is not simply a continent of the past. It may very well become one of the defining stories of the future. And if that happens, the question that once puzzled the world will finally have an answer.